Hello, and welcome to Sleepytimepod. I'm Abigail, and I'm here to accompany you on tonight's journey to peace and relaxation. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Find a comfortable position, whether you're lying in bed or resting in your favorite cozy spot. Let your body sink into the softness beneath you and gently close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, and then slowly let it out through your mouth, releasing any tension from the day. Let your shoulders relax, your arms grow heavy, and feel the weight of the world slowly slip away. Now picture a gentle breeze brushing against your skin, cool and comforting. You're walking through a peaceful forest. The soft crunch of leaves beneath your feet, the distant song of birds in the trees. Sunlight filters through the branches, creating dappled patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. With each step, you feel lighter, more at ease, knowing you are in a place where time slows down. As you breathe deeply, the world around you quiets, and you're ready to drift into tonight's story. Now, let's begin. In the quiet village of artists, the air always smelled of lavender, and the sky often glowed with soft golden light. On the edge of this serene place lay the vast expanse of the whispering forest, a place both feared and revered by the villagers. For as long as anyone could remember, the forest had been said to hold ancient, quiet magic trees that whispered forgotten secrets, animals that knew the language of dreams, and paths that led to places only a few dared to discover. Lyra, a young woman of the village, had always been drawn to the forest, while others stayed close to the fields or spent their days at the market square. Lyra found herself wandering the boundary between her world and the one beyond the shadowy border of the forest. She had grown up hearing stories of its strange power, the way it seemed to call to those who listened closely enough. And tonight, as the last rays of the sun faded into twilight, that call felt stronger than ever. She stood at her window, watching the trees sway gently in the evening breeze, their dark silhouettes blending into the deepening sky. The world was hushed now, save for the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional owl hooting from a nearby branch. But beyond those familiar sounds, she heard something else. A whisper, soft and barely audible, as if the very trees themselves were calling her name. The pull was irresistible. Without hesitation, Lyra wrapped herself in her cloak, its fabric worn but warm, and slipped out into the cool night air. The path from her small cottage to the forest was lined with tall grasses, their tips swaying softly in the breeze. Each step she took seemed to carry her farther from the village and deeper into the mystery that awaited her. As she neared the edge of the forest, the whispers grew louder, not as voices but as a feeling, a beckoning that tugged gently at her heart. The trees stood tall and still, their branches forming a natural archway that invited her in. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting silvery shadows on the ground. Era hesitated for only a moment before stepping beneath the trees, the forest swallowing her in its quiet embrace. The air here was different, cooler, crisper, and alive with an energy that thrummed beneath her skin. She could feel it, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, pulsing through the roots of the trees and into the soles of her feet. As she walked, the sounds of the village faded into the distance, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves, the distant trickle of water from a hidden stream, and the low, comforting hum of the forest. The path before her seemed to unfold naturally, as though the forest was guiding her to where she needed to be. It wasn't long before Era came to a clearing. The moonlight bathed the open space in a soft glow, and at its center stood a tree unlike any she had ever seen. It was ancient, its bark twisted and gnarled, with roots that burrowed deep into the earth and branches that stretched high into the heavens. The leaves shimmered silver in the moonlight, and as the wind stirred them, they seemed to whisper secrets only the tree could know. Era approached, her hand outstretched. As her fingers touched the rough bark, she felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet strength that filled her with a sense of belonging. The whispers became clearer now, not as words but as emotions, as feelings that resonated deep within her soul. She closed her eyes, letting the tree's energy wash over her, and in that moment she understood what it was trying to tell her. The tree spoke of patience, not in words, but in the way its roots had grown deep and strong over the centuries, never rushing, never seeking more than what it needed. It spoke of endurance, of standing tall in the face of storms and winds that sought to break it. And most of all, it spoke of stillness, the quiet power that comes from being rooted in one place, from letting the world move around you while you remain steadfast and calm. Era breathed deeply, the scent of earth and leaves filling her lungs. She felt lighter now, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. The worries she had carried with her, the small concerns of village life, the uncertainty of the future seemed distant and unimportant here, in the presence of this ancient tree. She sat at its base, the soft moss beneath her, a perfect cushion, and gazed up at the sky through the branches. The stars were bright tonight, their light twinkling like distant fires in the darkness. She felt connected to them, to the earth, to the tree, and to the whispers that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. As she sat there, time seemed to slow, the forest cradling her in its peaceful embrace. The gentle hum of nature surrounded her, lulling her into a state of deep relaxation. Era closed her eyes and let the sounds of the forest wash over her, the soft rustling of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the steady rhythm of her own breath. The night deepened, but Era felt no urgency to return home. Here, beneath the tree, she felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. the forest had welcomed her, had shared its quiet wisdom with her, and now it seemed to be watching over her as she rested. She thought of the stories she had heard as a child, the tales of the whispering forest, of the magic that lived within its trees, of the creatures that roamed its depths. She had always been fascinated by those stories, but now, sitting here, she realized that the forest was more than just a place of legend. It was alive, filled with an ancient energy that connected everything within it. Era's thoughts drifted as she sat in the stillness, her mind quieting as the night wore on. The whispers of the forest had become a part of her now, a gentle hum that resonated deep within her soul. She didn't know how long she sat there, but when she finally stood to leave, she felt different. Lighter, calmer, more at peace with herself and the world around her. Era's footsteps were soft as she made her way back through the forest, the path illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. The trees seemed to part for her, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, as if bidding her farewell. The whispers were quieter now, but still present, a reminder of the wisdom she had gained from the ancient tree. As she emerged from the forest and stepped back onto the familiar path that led to her village, Era felt a deep sense of gratitude. The forest had given her more than just a night of peace. It had shared with her its timeless wisdom, its quiet strength, and its boundless patience. And though the village lay before her, peaceful and still in the moonlight, she knew that she would return to the forest again, to the place where the trees whispered and the world slowed down. For there, in the heart of the whispering forest, she had found a sanctuary, a place where she could always return, no matter what life might bring. The first light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the village. Era had returned from the whispering forest just hours earlier, her mind still filled with the echoes of the ancient tree's whispers. She moved slowly through her cottage, her hands brushing the worn wooden surfaces of the table, the smooth stone of the hearth, as though grounding herself after the surreal, dreamlike night she had experienced. But even as she prepared her morning tea and gazed out at the sun-dappled garden, she couldn't shake the feeling that the forest still called to her. The whispers were faint now, distant as if carried on a breeze she could no longer hear, yet they lingered in her mind, beckoning her back to that peaceful clearing where the ancient tree had shared its quiet wisdom with her. She wrapped her hands around her warm cup and sat by the window, watching the village slowly come to life. The familiar sounds of the morning, birds singing, the clatter of pots from her neighbor's kitchen, the soft murmur of voices should have brought her comfort, but instead they felt distant, almost detached, as though the village existed in another world altogether. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the tea seep into her hands, and allowed her thoughts to drift back to the forest. The tree had spoken to her, not in words, but in feelings, in a language that was older than any she had ever known. Its message had been clear: patience, stillness, the strength that came from standing firm. But there had been something else too, a sense of purpose, a quiet urgency that she hadn't fully understood at the time. Now, as she sat in the quiet of her cottage, that sense of purpose began to take shape. The forest had shared its secrets with her, but it had also given her something more, a task, a journey that was only just beginning. Lyra set down her cup and rose from her chair. She couldn't ignore the pull any longer. She needed to return to the forest to seek out the answers that still eluded her. The whispers were calling again, faint but persistent, and she knew that they held the key to something greater. She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against her skin. The village was peaceful, bathed in the soft light of the rising sun, but Lyra barely noticed it. Her focus was on the forest, on the path that would lead her back to the ancient tree. The path into the whispering forest was familiar now, but it felt different in the light of day. The trees, which had seemed so mysterious and alive in the moonlight, now stood tall and still, their leaves shimmering in the morning sun. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves accompanied her as she walked deeper into the woods. But even in the daylight, the whispers remained. They were quieter now, more like a gentle breeze than the urgent pull she had felt the night before. Yet they were still there, guiding her steps as she moved deeper into the forest. It wasn't long before she found herself once again in the clearing, standing before the ancient tree. Its gnarled branches stretched toward the sky, its roots twisting deep into the earth, and the silver leaves shimmered in the light. The tree seemed unchanged, timeless in its quiet wisdom. Lyra approached the tree slowly, her hand outstretched, and once again felt the warmth of its bark beneath her fingers. The whispers grew louder, not in words but in feelings, in the same language she had begun to understand the night before. The tree spoke of balance this time, of the delicate dance between stillness and movement, of the way the world changed and grew, yet always returned to the same rhythms. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the tree's message deep within her. There is strength in stillness, the tree seemed to say, but also in knowing when to move. Like the wind that stirs the leaves or the river that carves its path through the earth, there is a time for action, a time for change. Lyra stood still, her fingers brushing the bark as she let the tree's wisdom settle into her heart. She had always been drawn to the quiet, to the stillness of the forest, but now she understood that there was more to the world than standing still. The tree was teaching her not only to be patient, but also to be aware of when the time came for movement, for change. As she stood there, the wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves of the tree and stirring the air around her. The soft whispers seemed to blend with the sound of the wind, creating a melody that filled the clearing. Lyra opened her eyes and stepped back, watching as the tree swayed gently in the breeze. She felt a sense of clarity now, a deeper understanding of the world and her place within it. The forest was not just a place of stillness, but a place of transformation, of growth and change. She turned to leave the clearing, her mind still buzzing with the tree's wisdom. But as she took her first step away, something caught her eye. Just beyond the clearing, where the shadows of the trees stretched long and dark, she saw movement. Her heart quickened, but she didn't feel fear. Instead, she felt curiosity, an urge to follow the movement, to see what or who was there. Era stepped cautiously toward the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the shadows. As she approached, the figure became clearer, a small, delicate creature with soft, shimmering fur, no larger than a fox. Its eyes glowed softly in the dim light, and its body seemed to blend with the shadows as though it were part of the forest itself. The creature looked at her, its gaze calm and steady, as if it had been waiting for her. Era knelt down slowly, careful not to startle the creature. It didn't move, its glowing eyes watching her with quiet intelligence. She could feel the energy of the forest surrounding them both, the whispers of the trees growing softer now, more like a gentle hum. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, though she wasn't sure if the creature would understand her. The creature tilted its head, its soft fur catching the light as it moved. It didn't speak, but somehow Era felt that it was communicating with her in the same way the tree had, through feelings, through the quiet language of the forest. It stepped closer, its delicate paws barely making a sound as it moved. Era held out her hand, unsure of what to expect, but the creature didn't shy away. Instead, it pressed its nose gently against her fingers, its fur warm and soft to the touch. A feeling washed over her then, a sense of belonging, of connection, as though the creature and the forest were one and the same. It wasn't just the trees or the animals that held the magic of the forest, but everything within it, all connected by the same quiet energy. The creature stepped back, its glowing eyes still fixed on Era as it turned and disappeared into the shadows once more. Era stood, her heart still racing from the encounter, but she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a deep sense of peace, of having been accepted by the forest in a way she hadn't before. She knew now that the forest held more secrets than she had ever imagined. The ancient tree had shared its wisdom, but there was more to learn, more to discover. The forest was alive with magic, with whispers that carried the knowledge of ages, and Era had only just begun to understand it. She turned back toward the clearing, the wind still rustling the leaves above her, and began the walk back toward the village. But she knew that this was not the end of her journey. The forest had called to her for a reason, and she would return to it again, perhaps even soon. The path back to the village felt different now, lighter somehow, as though the forest itself had changed. Era walked slowly, savoring the quiet, the feeling of connection that lingered in her heart. As she stepped out of the forest and into the sunlight, she glanced back at the trees, their shadows long and soft in the morning light. The whispers were faint now, but she knew they would never truly fade. The forest had become a part of her, just as she had become a part of it. And as she walked back toward her cottage, her heart was filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. There was more to discover, more to learn from the forest and its ancient magic. But for now, she was content to carry the wisdom of the tree and the memory of the mysterious creature with her. The sun had begun its slow descent by the time Era returned to her cottage. The day, though filled with light, had felt strangely fleeting, as though the hours had slipped by unnoticed while her mind wandered back to the whispering forest. The ancient tree's teachings, the encounter with the mysterious creature, the whispers that had tugged at her heart, all of it had left her feeling both deeply grounded and curiously adrift, as though the world around her had changed in ways she couldn't quite name. She stood for a moment by the door of her small home, her hand resting on the rough wooden frame as she gazed out at the village. The evening was quiet, the sounds of daily life fading into the stillness that accompanied the approaching twilight. She watched as the villagers went about their routines, tending to their animals, gathering firewood, speaking in hushed voices as they prepared for the night. It was a peaceful scene, one that she had seen countless times before, yet it felt different now, as though she were observing it from a distance, no longer fully part of it. Her thoughts drifted once more to the forest, to the strange pull she had felt, and the sense that there was something more waiting for her there. She couldn't explain it, not even to herself, but the forest had become more than just a place of quiet refuge. It had called to her, shared its wisdom with her, and now it felt as though it was guiding her towards something larger, something deeper than she had ever imagined. Era sighed softly, her breath misting in the cool evening air. The village, with all its familiar comforts, suddenly seemed small, confined, while the forest, with its vast mysteries and quiet magic, beckoned to her with a promise of discovery. She stepped inside her cottage, closing the door behind her. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting a soft, flickering light across the room. She moved to stoke the flames, adding a few logs and watching as the fire sparked and crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. The warmth of the fire enveloped her, but even as she sat by the hearth, she felt the whispers of the forest tugging at her, a soft hum just at the edge of her awareness. She knew she wouldn't be able to resist the call for long. The forest had become a part of her now, its whispers woven into the very fabric of her thoughts, its presence lingering in her heart even when she was far from its trees. And so, as the fire crackled softly and the night deepened, Era made her decision. She would return to the forest at dawn. There was more to learn, more to discover, and she knew that the ancient tree and the creatures of the forest had much more to share with her. The next morning arrived with a pale, golden light that seeped through the cracks in the shutters, casting a soft glow over the cottage. Era awoke early, her mind already focused on the journey ahead. She dressed quickly, wrapping herself in her cloak and slipping her small pack over her shoulders. The day promised to be cool, the air still heavy with the crispness of early autumn. She stepped outside, the village still quiet in the early hours, and made her way toward the familiar path that led to the forest. The sky above was streaked with the soft hues of dawn, the first rays of sunlight just beginning to touch the tops of the trees. The world felt quiet, still as though it too was waiting for what was to come. The path wound gently through the village and up toward the forest, the air growing cooler as she neared the trees. The familiar scent of pine and earth greeted her as she stepped beneath the canopy, the shadows of the trees stretching long and dark across the forest floor. The whispers returned almost immediately, soft at first, but growing louder with each step she took. They were not urgent, not forceful, but they were constant, a gentle hum that seemed to guide her deeper into the heart of the forest. Era followed the whispers, her feet moving instinctively along the path, though it felt less like walking and more like being led by the forest itself. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling softly overhead, and the air was filled with the faint scent of damp moss and fallen leaves. It wasn't long before she found herself standing once more in the clearing. The ancient tree stood tall and still at its center, its gnarled branches reaching high into the sky, its roots twisting deep into the earth. The silver leaves shimmered in the morning light, and the whispers seemed to emanate from the tree itself, filling the clearing with their soft hum. Era approached the tree slowly, her heart steady but filled with anticipation. She had returned as she had known she would, but this time felt different. The forest felt more alive, more aware of her presence, as though it had been waiting for her. She reached out and placed her hand on the tree's bark, feeling the warmth of its ancient energy flow through her once more. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind with thoughts and feelings that were both familiar and foreign. This time, the tree spoke of growth, not just the slow, steady growth of its own roots and branches, but the growth of the world around it. It spoke of the changing seasons, the cycles of life and death, the way the forest adapted to the shifting of the earth and the sky. The world changes, the tree seemed to say, but it grows stronger with each change. Like the river that carves its path through the mountains, or the seed that breaks through the soil, growth comes from movement, from change. Era stood still, her fingers resting on the bark, as she let the tree's words wash over her. She had always thought of growth as something slow, something steady, but now she realized that growth could also be sudden, unpredictable. It could come from the most unexpected places, from the smallest shifts in the earth beneath her feet. As Era stood there, letting the tree's wisdom settle into her heart, she felt a soft rustling behind her. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the shadows at the edge of the clearing, and saw the same delicate creature she had encountered the day before. It stood quietly, its glowing eyes watching her with the same calm intelligence, its body blending almost seamlessly with the shadows of the trees. Era felt a sense of calm wash over her as she met the creature's gaze, and she knew instinctively that it had come to guide her once more. The creature stepped forward, its soft paws barely making a sound as it moved toward the path that led deeper into the forest. Era followed without hesitation, her footsteps light and quiet as the creature led her away from the clearing and into the shadows of the trees. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the forest growing denser around them, the air cooler and filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. The whispers of the forest were quieter here, almost inaudible, but Era could still feel them, a soft hum that pulsed beneath the surface of the earth. The path wound deeper into the forest, the trees growing taller and more ancient, their branches intertwining above her to form a thick canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air was cool and still, and the only sound was the soft crunch of leaves beneath her feet. As they walked, Era felt a sense of anticipation building within her. She didn't know where the creature was leading her, but she trusted it completely. The forest had never steered her wrong, and she knew that whatever lay ahead, it would be important. Finally, the creature led her to a small, secluded glade, hidden deep within the forest. The trees here were ancient, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches heavy with silver leaves that shimmered in the dim light. At the center of the glade stood a stone circle, its surface worn smooth by time, and in the center of the circle lay a pool of crystal clear water. The creature stopped at the edge of the glade, its glowing eyes watching her, as if waiting for her to step forward. Era felt a sense of awe as she approached the stone circle, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The pool of water was perfectly still, its surface like glass, reflecting the silver leaves of the trees above. Era knelt by the edge of the pool, her fingers trailing lightly over the water's surface. The whispers were louder now, filling the air around her, but they were different here, softer, more like a song than a hum. She gazed into the water, her reflection staring back at her, and as she watched, the surface began to ripple, as though the water itself was alive. The ripples spread outward, distorting her reflection until it vanished entirely, replaced by a vision of the forest itself. In the water, she saw the trees swaying gently in the breeze, their branches heavy with silver leaves. She saw the ancient tree in the clearing, its roots twisting deep into the earth, and the creature standing silently by her side. But beyond that, she saw something more, a vision of the forest's past, of the way it had changed and grown over the centuries, shaped by the winds and the earth and the passing of time. The vision shifted, and now she saw herself, standing in the clearing, her hand resting on the ancient tree's bark. She saw the creature watching her from the shadows, its eyes glowing softly in the dim light, and she felt the connection between herself and the forest, the way the whispers had become a part of her. Era blinked, and the vision faded. Water returning to its still, glassy state, she sat back on her heels, her heart steady, but her mind buzzing with the knowledge she had just seen. The forest had shown her its past, its present, and its future. It had shared its secrets with her, its wisdom, and its strength. And now it was guiding her towards something even greater, something that she knew she was meant to discover. She rose slowly, her eyes scanning the glade as the whispers faded into the soft hum of the forest. The creature still stood at the edge of the trees, watching her with its calm, glowing eyes, as though waiting for her to understand what the forest had shown her. And as Lyra stood there, the soft breeze rustling the leaves above her, she knew that her journey was far from over. Lyra stood at the edge of the glade, her heart still steady as the vision in the pool rippled through her mind. The creature had not moved from the shadows, its eyes fixed on her with that same calm, watchful gaze. There was something more to this place, something that lingered just beyond her understanding. The forest had shown her its past and its present, but the future it hinted at felt distant, like a story yet to be written. She knelt again beside the pool, the cold stone beneath her fingers grounding her in the present moment. The water's surface had stilled, reflecting the silver leaves of the trees swaying gently overhead. The whispers had quieted, but they were not gone. Lyra could feel them humming beneath the surface of her thoughts, a soft reminder that the forest's secrets were not fully revealed yet. The stone circle felt ancient, older even than the great tree that had spoken to her. She could sense its history, carved into the earth by hands long forgotten, yet still vibrant with energy. As her fingers traced the worn edges of the stones, she felt a connection to those who had come before, those who had stood in this very place, seeking the same wisdom the forest now offered her. She breathed in deeply, letting the scent of the forest fill her lungs. Damp earth, pine needles, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers hidden among the trees. The air was cool and crisp, and each breath seemed to bring her deeper into the forest's embrace. The creature stirred then, its soft fur catching the dappled light as it stepped forward from the shadows. It moved silently, its glowing eyes never leaving Lyra as it approached the edge of the pool. It was close enough now that she could see the fine details of its fur, the way it shimmered like moonlight on water, and the subtle, graceful movement of its body as it sat beside her. For a long moment, they simply watched each other, Lyra and the creature, both calm, both silent. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next step, the next revelation. "You've led me here," Lyra said softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "But why?" The creature blinked slowly, its eyes narrowing slightly as if considering her question. It didn't answer, at least not in words, but Lyra felt something stir within her, a sense of understanding that went deeper than language. The forest had not brought her here to find answers. It had brought her here to listen. To listen not just to the whispers of the trees, but to the quiet within herself. Lyra closed her eyes, letting her breath slow, and allowed herself to sink into the silence of the glade. The pool's still surface reflected the soft sounds of the forest, the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the quiet shifting of the earth beneath her. But beyond those sounds was something deeper, something quieter, a presence that filled the air like a barely audible hum. It was the forest itself, alive and aware, connected to every tree, every stone, every creature. Lyra could feel it now, a subtle pulse that echoed within her own heartbeat, a rhythm that tied her to this place in ways she hadn't fully understood before. The creature beside her remained still, its eyes half closed as though it too was listening to the pulse of the forest. It seemed content to simply be, to exist in this moment with her, as if it knew that the true wisdom of the forest was found in the stillness between breaths. Time passed slowly, or perhaps it didn't pass at all. In this place, in this moment, Era felt as though she had stepped outside of time itself into a space where past, present, and future flowed together like water in the pool before her. The vision she had seen no longer seemed distant or unreal. It was part of her now, woven into the fabric of her being. When she finally opened her eyes, the sun had shifted in the sky, its light casting long shadows across the glade. The creature still sat beside her, its gaze soft and calm, and Era felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She rose slowly, her movements careful and deliberate, as though not to disturb the quiet magic that surrounded her. The creature followed her with its eyes, but made no move to follow as she stepped away from the pool and toward the path that led back into the trees. Era glanced back once, her gaze lingering on the stone circle and the still pool at its center. She could feel the forest watching her, its presence warm and reassuring, as though it was telling her that she had learned what she needed, at least for now. But she knew she would return. The forest had become a part of her, and its whispers would continue to guide her no matter where her path led. The path through the trees was familiar now, though it still held the same quiet mystery that had drawn her in from the beginning. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the scent of pine and moss, and the soft crunch of leaves beneath her feet was the only sound that accompanied her as she walked. The creature did not follow her, but Era didn't feel alone. The forest itself seemed to walk with her, its whispers faint but constant, a reminder of the connection she now shared with it. She felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her, and each step seemed to carry her closer to something she couldn't quite name, but knew was important. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to the vision she had seen in the pool. The forest had shown her its past, its present, and a glimpse of its future, but the meaning behind the vision was still unclear. There had been a sense of urgency, of change, but also of balance, of the need to move forward without losing sight of what was most important. It was a message she felt deeply, one that resonated within her as she moved through the quiet woods. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that the forest's wisdom would guide her when the time came. For now, though, she was content to simply walk, to listen to the soft hum of the forest around her, and to trust that the path would reveal itself in time. As she neared the edge of the forest, the familiar sounds of the village began to drift toward her. The distant murmur of voices, the clatter of pots from the kitchens, the soft bleating of sheep in the fields. It was a comforting sound, a reminder of a world she had left behind, and yet it felt different now. Era paused at the boundary between the trees and the open fields, her gaze lingering on the village below. It was still the same village she had always known, but she was not the same. The forest had changed her, had opened her eyes to a world beyond the one she had always known, and she knew that she would never see things the same way again. But that was not a bad thing. The village, with all its routines and rhythms, was part of the balance the forest had taught her. It was the stillness that allowed for movement, the grounding that made growth possible. And just as the forest had its whispers, so too did the village have its quiet wisdom, its own way of teaching her the lessons she needed to learn. She smiled softly to herself and stepped out of the trees, her feet moving lightly across the soft grass as she made her way back toward her cottage. When Era reached her cottage, the fire in the hearth had long since gone cold, but she didn't mind. The warmth of the forest still lingered in her bones, and she moved through her small home with a sense of calm purpose. She stoked the fire, watching as the flames slowly grew, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The familiar scent of wood smoke filled the room, mingling with the earthy scent of the forest that still clung to her cloak. As she sat by the fire, her thoughts drifted once more to the creature she had encountered in the forest. It had been so quiet, so still, and yet its presence had felt powerful, connected to the very heart of the forest itself. There was something about it that called to her, something she couldn't quite name but knew was important. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire soothe her as the whispers of the forest echoed softly in her mind. The day had been long, filled with revelations she hadn't expected, but she felt a deep sense of peace, of knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The forest had shown her its secrets, but she knew there was more to discover, more to learn. And as she sat by the fire, the soft hum of the forest still lingering in her thoughts, she knew that her journey was far from over. The morning light crept into the cottage, painting the walls with soft hues of gold. Era stirred from her sleep, feeling the warmth of the fire still clinging faintly to the stones in the hearth. She rose slowly, her body refreshed, but her mind already wandering back to the forest. The pull was still there, as it had been since she first heard the whispers, and now it was stronger than ever. Outside, the village was coming to life. The familiar sounds of people greeting one another, the soft bleating of sheep, and the clattering of pots reminded Era that her world was still here, still waiting for her. But something had shifted inside her. She could no longer view the village with the same eyes. The forest had opened something within her, revealing a world so vast and so connected to her spirit that everything else seemed small by comparison. She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders, the cool morning air seeping through the cracks in the door, and stepped outside. The village was bathed in the soft light of dawn, and the distant call of birds filled the air. But Era's gaze was already fixed on the forest, the place where her heart now belonged. She made her way quietly through the village, her footsteps light on the dewy grass. She passed familiar faces, neighbors, friends who greeted her with smiles and warm nods, but she couldn't linger. The forest was calling, and she knew she needed to return. The path into the forest felt different this morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows through the trees and turning the leaves a brilliant shade of green. The air was fresh, crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. But beyond the physical world, there was something deeper, something alive in the air, a hum that Era had come to recognize as the voice of the forest itself. The whispers greeted her almost as soon as she stepped beneath the canopy, soft and inviting, like old friends welcoming her back. She walked slowly, savoring the peacefulness that came with being among the trees. Each step seemed to bring her closer to the heart of the forest, where she knew the ancient trees stood, waiting for her. Era didn't hurry. She let the forest guide her, following the path as it wound deeper into the woods. The soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the rustle of branches in the breeze, and the distant song of birds all blended together into a soothing symphony. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, its energy pulsing through the ground and up into the air around her. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to the creature she had encountered the day before. The small, delicate animal with eyes that glowed like embers in the night. There had been something otherworldly about it, something beyond the ordinary creatures of the forest. It had guided her to the stone circle and the pool of water, where she had seen the vision of the forest's past and future. But what was the creature's role in all of this? What did it know that she didn't? The path led her once again to the clearing, where the great tree stood tall and proud, its silver leaves shimmering in the morning light. Era paused at the edge of the clearing, her heart filling with a sense of reverence. The tree seemed almost alive, its branches swaying gently in the breeze as if acknowledging her presence. She approached slowly, her hand outstretched, and placed her palm against the rough bark. The familiar warmth spread through her once more, and the whispers grew louder, filling her mind with thoughts and feelings that resonated deep within her soul. The tree spoke of strength this time, not the strength of muscle or force, but the strength that came from standing firm in the face of adversity. It spoke of the way its roots had grown deep into the earth, anchoring it against the storms and winds that sought to topple it. And it spoke of patience, of the quiet power that came from waiting, from allowing time to do its work without rushing the process. Era closed her eyes, letting the tree's wisdom wash over her. She had always been drawn to the idea of strength, but now she understood that true strength was not about being unyielding. It was about bending with the wind without breaking, about standing firm without becoming rigid. It was about knowing when to act and when to remain still. As Era stood there, her hand still resting on the bark, she felt a subtle shift in the air around her. The whispers, which had been soft and calming, began to change. They grew quieter, more distant, as if something else was taking their place. She opened her eyes and glanced around the clearing, her gaze scanning the trees for any sign of movement. And then she saw it, the creature from before, standing at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on her. It watched her silently, its fur catching the light as it moved, almost as though it were a shadow brought to life. But there was no fear in its gaze, only a quiet curiosity, as if it, too, was waiting for something. Era took a step toward the creature, her heart steady, but her mind buzzing with questions. The creature tilted its head slightly, its glowing eyes narrowing as it studied her. "Why have you brought me here?" Era asked softly, though she wasn't sure if the creature could understand her. The creature didn't answer, at least not in words, but Era felt a shift within herself, a sense of understanding that went deeper than language. The creature was not there to provide answers. It was there to guide her, to lead her to the places where the answers could be found. The forest itself was the source of wisdom, and the creature was simply its messenger. Without hesitation, the creature turned and slipped into the shadows of the trees, its movement as silent as a breath of wind. Era followed, her feet moving lightly across the forest floor as she trailed behind the creature. The path it led her down was different from the ones she had walked before. The trees grew closer together here, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air was cooler, and the whispers were softer, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The creature led her to a place she had never seen before, deep within the heart of the forest. It was a grove, hidden away from the rest of the world, surrounded by ancient trees whose trunks were thick and gnarled, their branches heavy with leaves that shimmered silver in the dim light. At the center of the grove stood a single stone, tall and smooth, its surface worn by time. The creature stopped at the edge of the grove, its eyes glowing softly as it watched Era step forward toward the stone. There was something sacred about this place, something ancient and powerful, and Era could feel it in the air around her. The whispers had quieted completely now, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the forest. She approached the stone slowly, her heart beating steadily in her chest. The stone seemed to hum with its own energy, a quiet vibration that pulsed beneath her fingers as she touched its surface. It was cool to the touch, but there was warmth beneath it, a steady, reassuring presence that felt familiar. As she stood there, her hand resting on the stone, she felt the presence of the forest all around her, strong, silent, and patient. And in that moment, she understood. The forest had brought her here to show her not just its wisdom, but its heart. This was the center, the place where all the whispers, all the energy converged. It was a place of stillness, of balance, and it was here that the true strength of the forest resided. Era closed her eyes, letting the energy of the grove wash over her. She could feel it, pulsing beneath her skin, a quiet hum that connected her to everything around her. The trees, the air. It was as though she had become a part of the forest itself, her heart beating in time with its ancient rhythms. And as she stood there, she realized something else. The forest had shown her its past and its present, but now it was showing her its future. She was a part of that future, just as the ancient trees and the delicate creature were. The wisdom of the forest was not something separate from her. It was something that lived within her, something she carried with her wherever she went. The creature watched her quietly from the edge of the grove, its eyes glowing softly in the dim light. It had brought her here for a reason, but it had also given her the freedom to discover that reason for herself. And now, as Era stood in the heart of the forest, she understood. The journey was not over. There was more to learn, more to discover, but for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. When Era finally opened her eyes, the grove was bathed in the soft light of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the clearing. The air was still and calm, and the soft hum of the forest had returned, though it now felt different, warmer, more welcoming, as though the forest itself was embracing her. Era took a deep breath, her fingers still resting on the cool surface of the stone. She felt different too, lighter, clearer, as if the weight of unanswered questions had lifted, replaced by a deep sense of connection. The forest was no longer just a place of mystery and whispers. It was a part of her now, woven into her very being. She turned slowly, her gaze falling on the creature that had guided her to this sacred place. It stood silently at the edge of the grove, its glowing eyes watching her with a calm that mirrored the stillness of the trees. Era felt a deep gratitude toward the creature, though she knew it was not just a guide, but a symbol of the forest's own quiet wisdom. For a moment, the two of them stood there, the distance between them bridged by a shared understanding. The creature had brought her to the heart of the forest, to the place where all the whispers converged, and now it seemed to be waiting for her to take the next step. What that step was, Era didn't yet know, but she trusted that the path would reveal itself in time. Without a word, the creature turned and slipped back into the shadows of the trees, its movement as silent as ever. Era watched it disappear into the dense forest, feeling a quiet sense of loss, but also knowing that it was not a farewell. The forest would always be with her now, and so too would the creature's quiet guidance. She stood in the grove for a long moment, letting the peace of the place wash over her, before turning to follow the path back through the trees. The air was cooler now, and the soft rustle of leaves overhead created a soothing melody as she walked. The path was familiar, but it felt different this time, more alive, more connected. Era could feel the presence of the forest all around her, a constant companion guiding her with each step. As she walked, the whispers returned, though they were softer now, more like a gentle hum that blended with the sound of the wind and the distant call of birds. The forest no longer felt like a place of secrets and hidden wisdom. It felt like home. Had dipped low by the time Era reached the edge of the forest, the last light of day casting a warm glow over the village below. She stood at the boundary for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the fields and cottages, the familiar landscape that had been her world for so long. It felt comforting to see it, to know that this part of her life still existed, even as her connection to the forest grew stronger with each passing day. Era smiled softly to herself as she stepped out of the trees and onto the soft grass of the village. The sounds of the evening, the murmur of voices, the distant clink of metal, the soft bleating of sheep, were familiar and grounding. Yet, despite the peacefulness of the village, she couldn't shake the feeling that the forest's whispers would continue to call to her, urging her to return. She made her way back to her cottage, her heart calm and her mind filled with the quiet wisdom she had gathered from the forest. The journey had been long, but it wasn't over. She knew that there was still more to learn, more to discover, and the forest would be there, waiting for her when the time came. For now, though, she was content. The forest had shown her its heart, and in doing so, it had revealed her own. Inside the cottage, the fire had burned low, the last embers glowing faintly in the hearth. Era moved through the quiet space, lighting a small candle and placing it on the table beside the window. She sat down, gazing out at the darkening sky, her thoughts still lingering on the grove and the stone, on the creature that had guided her there, and on the wisdom the forest had shared with her. The night was cool, and the soft chirp of crickets drifted through the open window. Era felt at peace, her mind calm as the weight of the day slipped away. She had found something in the forest that she hadn't even known she was searching for, a sense of purpose, of connection, of belonging. The forest had given her its wisdom, but it had also given her something deeper, a place where she could always return, a sanctuary where the whispers would always guide her. She took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill her lungs, and closed her eyes. The forest's whispers echoed softly in her mind, a quiet reminder that she was never truly alone. The trees, the earth, the air, they were all connected, just as she was connected to them, and in that connection she found a deep sense of peace. The night deepened, the stars twinkling faintly overhead, and Era allowed herself to drift into sleep, her dreams filled with the soft hum of the forest, the glow of silver leaves, and the quiet presence of the creature that had guided her to the heart of it all. Era awoke to the first light of dawn, her mind calm and clear after a night of dream-filled sleep. The whispers of the forest still lingered in her thoughts, soft and constant, like the distant hum of a melody she could no longer forget. She stretched beneath the warmth of her blanket, feeling the cool air brush against her skin as she slowly rose from her bed. The day outside was quiet, the village still wrapped in the soft embrace of early morning. Era moved through her small cottage with a sense of ease, her mind already wandering back to the forest. It had become a part of her daily rhythm now, a place where she felt connected to something greater, something ancient and wise. The village was still her home, but the forest had become her sanctuary. After dressing and eating a small breakfast, she stepped outside, the cool morning air refreshing against her face. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the fields and filling the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. The village was still quiet, the sounds of early morning activity just beginning to stir in the distance. Era's feet led her instinctively toward the familiar path that wound its way into the trees. She no longer hesitated at the edge of the forest, no longer felt the need to question why she was drawn there. The forest had become her companion, its whispers her guide, and she knew that each time she returned, it would share something new with her. The path into the forest was as familiar to her now as the streets of the village, but it still held the same sense of mystery and wonder. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves shimmering silver in the morning light. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the whispers greeted her as soon as she stepped beneath the canopy, soft and inviting, like old friends welcoming her back. Era walked slowly, savoring the peace that came with being among the trees. The forest seemed to hum with life around her, the soft rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the faint sound of a stream somewhere deep within the woods. It was a place of stillness, of quiet strength, and yet it was alive in a way that filled her with a sense of wonder. The path led her deeper into the forest, winding through familiar groves and past the great tree that had shared its wisdom with her. She paused for a moment by the tree, her hand resting on its rough bark, feeling the steady pulse of life that flowed through it. The whispers grew louder here, as they always did, filling her mind with thoughts and feelings that resonated deep within her. But today, something was different. The whispers, though familiar, carried a new energy, a sense of urgency that she hadn't felt before. It wasn't unsettling, but it was clear that the forest had something more to show her. Era closed her eyes, letting the whispers wash over her, and listened. The forest spoke of change, of movement, of growth that came from within. It was a message she had heard before, but now it felt stronger, more pressing. The world around her was shifting, and she was part of that shift. Era opened her eyes and stepped away from the tree, her gaze scanning the path ahead. The whispers urged her forward, and she followed without hesitation, her feet moving lightly across the forest floor. The air grew cooler as she walked, and the trees grew closer together, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead that blocked out much of the sunlight. The path led her to a place she had never been before, a part of the forest that felt older, more hidden. The trees here were ancient, their trunks thick and gnarled, their bark covered in moss and lichen. The air was still, almost heavy, and the whispers were quieter now, more like a faint hum that seemed to come from the very earth beneath her feet. Era slowed her pace, her heart steady, but her mind alert. There was something about this place that felt different, more sacred, and she knew that the forest had brought her here for a reason. The whispers, though faint, guided her steps as she moved deeper into the grove, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. And then she saw it. At the far end of the grove, hidden among the trees, stood a stone archway, its surface worn smooth by time. The arch was covered in vines and moss, but its shape was unmistakable, a gateway, ancient and forgotten, leading to a place beyond the forest. Era's heart quickened, but she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a deep sense of anticipation, as though she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Era approached the archway slowly, her fingers brushing the cool stone as she stepped beneath its shadow. The air here was different, thicker, almost as if it carried the weight of ages long past. The whispers had grown quieter still, but they were present, a soft hum that filled the space around her. Beyond the archway lay a path, narrow and overgrown, leading deeper into the forest. Era hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, her feet moving lightly over the moss-covered ground. The path was dark, the trees here even older than those in the grove, their branches twisting together to form a thick canopy that blocked out all but the faintest light. The whispers returned as she walked, soft and distant, guiding her steps. The path wound through the trees, the air growing cooler and more still with each passing moment. There was a sense of stillness here, a quiet that filled her with both peace and anticipation. She felt as though she were walking towards something important, something she was meant to find. The path led her to a clearing, hidden deep within the heart of the forest. The trees that surrounded it were ancient, their trunks thick and twisted, their branches heavy with silver leaves that shimmered in the dim light. At the center of the clearing stood a single stone pillar, tall and smooth, its surface etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the shadows. Era approached the pillar slowly, her heart steady, but her mind buzzing with questions. The whispers were louder here, though still soft, filling her mind with thoughts and feelings she couldn't quite name. She reached out and placed her hand on the smooth surface of the pillar, feeling the faint warmth that pulsed beneath her fingers. The symbols on the pillar glowed brighter as she touched it, and for a moment the air around her seemed to hum with energy. Era closed her eyes, letting the whispers wash over her, and listened. The forest spoke to her, not in words, but in feelings, in images that filled her mind. It showed her the past, the ancient trees, the creatures that had once roamed these woods, the people who had come before her, seeking the same wisdom she now sought. It showed her the present, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the village beyond the forest. And then it showed her the future. The vision was not clear, not like the one she had seen in the pool, but it was enough. She saw the forest, still standing tall and proud, but it was different. The trees were older, their branches heavier, their leaves darker. The whispers were still there, but they were quieter, more distant, as though the forest itself was fading. And then she saw herself standing at the edge of the forest, her eyes fixed on something beyond the trees. She was older, wiser, but there was a sadness in her gaze, a sense of loss that filled her heart. She reached out, as though to touch the forest one last time, but the trees had already begun to fade, their whispers growing fainter with each passing moment. The vision faded, and Era opened her eyes, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had seen. The future was uncertain, but it was clear that the forest would not remain as it was forever. Change was coming, slow and inevitable, and she was a part of that change. She stepped back from the pillar, her mind buzzing with thoughts and questions. The whispers had quieted again, but she could still feel them, a constant presence in the back of her mind. The forest had shown her its future, but it had also shown her her own. She was connected to this place in ways she hadn't fully understood before, and now she knew that her journey was far from over. Era stood in the clearing for a long moment, her heart calm, but her mind still processing what she had seen. The future was uncertain, but she felt a deep sense of peace knowing that she was a part of it, that the forest had chosen her to carry its whispers forward. The air in the clearing was still, and the faint glow of the symbols on the pillar had faded. Era turned slowly, her gaze sweeping over the ancient trees that surrounded her. The forest had given her its wisdom, its strength, and now it had given her a glimpse of what was to come. She knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, changes, moments of doubt. But she also knew that the forest would be with her, guiding her with its whispers, showing her the way forward, and in that she found comfort. With one last glance at the pillar, Era stepped back onto the path, her feet moving lightly over the moss-covered ground. The forest was quiet now, but she could still feel its presence, a constant hum that filled the air around her. As she made her way back toward the archway, she felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the forest, but to the world around her. The whispers had become a part of her, a quiet reminder that she was never truly alone. The sun was setting by the time Era reached the edge of the forest, casting long shadows across the village. She stood for a moment at the boundary, her gaze lingering on the familiar landscape before her. The village was still the same, but she was not. The forest had changed her, had given her its wisdom, and now she carried that wisdom with her wherever she went. She smiled softly to herself as she stepped out of the trees and onto the soft grass of the village. The sounds of the evening, the distant murmur of voices, the soft clink of metal, the gentle rustle of the wind, were familiar and grounding, but the whispers were still there, faint but constant, a reminder that the forest would always be a part of her. Era made her way back to her cottage, her heart calm and her mind clear. The journey was far from over, but she was ready. The forest had shown her the way, and now it was up to her to follow it. Era sat by the window in her cottage, watching the last light of day slip away beyond the horizon. The village was quiet now, the soft sounds of evening settling like a blanket over the world. The fire in the hearth crackled softly behind her, casting a warm glow over the small room. Yet, despite the calm of the night, her thoughts were far from peaceful. They lingered on the vision the forest had shown her. The future it had revealed, one where the trees were older, darker, fading away into the shadows. She could still feel the weight of the forest's whispers, soft but persistent, as if they were waiting for her to act, waiting for her to take the next step. The future the forest had shown her felt distant, yet it carried a sense of urgency she couldn't ignore. Change was coming, and she was a part of it. But what that change would look like, or how it would come to pass, was still unclear. She sighed softly, her breath misting the glass of the window as she leaned back in her chair. The village outside was still, the streets empty, the fields bathed in the soft glow of the rising moon. It was a familiar scene, one she had known her whole life, but now it felt different, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to begin. Era's gaze drifted toward the distant line of trees at the edge of the forest. Even from here, she could feel the pull, the quiet hum of the whispers that seemed to call her back. She had thought, after the vision, that she might find some peace, some clarity about what she was meant to do. But instead, the forest had left her with more questions, questions that gnawed at the edges of her thoughts, refusing to be silenced. The fire crackled behind her, filling the quiet room with its warmth, but Era felt restless. She stood, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor, as she moved to the hearth. She knelt by the fire, stirring the embers with a long iron poker, watching as the flames flared up, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The warmth was comforting, but it did little to quiet her mind. The vision had unsettled her in ways she hadn't expected. The forest had always been a place of peace, a sanctuary where she could find stillness and clarity. But now, it seemed to be urging her forward, pushing her towards something she didn't yet understand. She rose from the hearth, her gaze drifting once more to the window. The moonlight bathed the village in a soft silver glow, and the line of trees at the edge of the forest seemed to shimmer in the distance, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Era knew what she had to do. The forest was calling her back, and this time she couldn't ignore its pull. She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The village was quiet, the streets empty, but the whispers were there, faint but constant, guiding her steps as she made her way toward the forest. The moonlight cast long shadows across the fields, and the stars twinkled faintly in the dark sky above. The path to the forest was familiar, but tonight it felt different. The air was cooler, crisper, and the trees seemed to stand taller, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The whispers grew louder as she approached the edge of the forest, welcoming her back, urging her forward. Era stepped beneath the canopy of trees, the soft rustle of leaves greeting her like an old friend. The path wound through the woods, bathed in the silvery light of the moon, and the whispers guided her steps, leading her deeper into the heart of the forest. She moved quietly, her footsteps light on the forest floor. The air was filled with the familiar scents of pine and damp earth, and the soft sounds of the forest. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, created a soothing symphony that wrapped around her like a blanket. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to the vision. The future the forest had shown her was one of change, of transformation, but it was also one of uncertainty. The forest had given her its wisdom, but it had also placed a heavy burden on her shoulders. She was part of this change, but she didn't yet know how or why. The path led her to a familiar clearing where the great tree stood tall and silent at its center. Its silver leaves shimmered in the moonlight, and its gnarled branches reached high into the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. Era approached the tree slowly, her heart steady but her mind buzzing with questions. She placed her hand on the rough bark, feeling the warmth of the tree's ancient energy flow through her. The whispers grew louder here, filling her mind with thoughts and feelings that resonated deep within her soul. The tree spoke of balance this time, not just the balance of stillness and movement, but the balance between life and death, growth and decay. It spoke of the cycles of the forest, the way the trees shed their leaves in autumn only to bloom again in the spring. It spoke of change as something inevitable, something necessary for growth. But there was more. The tree's whispers carried a new urgency, a sense of time running out, the future it had shown her, the vision of the forest fading, the whispers growing distant, was not some far off possibility. It was already beginning. Era's heart quickened as the realization settled over her. The forest was dying. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. The whispers, once so strong and constant, were fading. The ancient trees, with all their wisdom, were growing weaker, their roots no longer as deep as they once were. And she was part of this. The forest had chosen her, not just to learn its secrets, but to help protect it, to ensure that its whispers would continue to be heard. But how? How could she, one person, make a difference in something so vast, so ancient? Era stepped back from the tree, her mind buzzing with thoughts. The forest had given her its wisdom, its strength, but now it was asking something more of her. It was asking her to act, to take up the mantle of protector, to ensure that its whispers would continue to echo through the trees. She turned slowly, her gaze scanning the clearing. The air was still, the moonlight casting long shadows across the ground. The creature that had guided her before was nowhere to be seen, but Era could feel its presence, watching her from the shadows. She knew what she had to do. The forest had given her its wisdom, but it was up to her to use that wisdom to find a way to protect the ancient trees, to ensure that the forest would continue to thrive for generations to come. But she couldn't do it alone. The forest had taught her that strength came not from standing alone, but from being connected to the trees, to the earth, to the people around her. She would need help, guidance, and she knew where to find it. Lyra turned and began walking back along the path, her footsteps light on the forest floor. The whispers were softer now, but they were still there, guiding her, urging her forward. As she emerged from the forest and stepped onto the soft grass of the village, Lyra felt a renewed sense of purpose. The vision the forest had shown her was not just a warning, it was a call to action, and she would answer that call. The village was quiet as she made her way through the streets, the familiar cottages bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. She stopped outside the small house at the edge of the village, her heart steady but her mind filled with anticipation. Inside, a fire burned low in the hearth, casting a warm glow through the window. Lyra knocked softly on the door, her breath misting in the cool night air. After a moment, the door opened and an older woman stepped into the light. Her eyes were kind, her face lined with age and wisdom, and she smiled softly as she saw Lyra standing there. "I knew you would come," the woman said, her voice soft but steady. Lyra nodded, stepping into the warmth of the cottage. "The forest has shown me what's coming. I don't know how, but I need your help." The woman's smile widened, and she gestured for Lyra to sit by the fire. "The forest has been whispering to me for years. It chose you, just as it once chose me, and together we will ensure that its whispers continue." Lyra sat by the fire, feeling the warmth seep into her bones as the woman poured them both cups of tea. The soft crackle of the fire filled the small room, and for the first time since the vision, Lyra felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't alone in this. The forest had chosen her, yes, but it had also given her allies. The people who understood its wisdom and its power. The older woman sat across from her, her eyes twinkling in the firelight. "The forest is alive, Lyra, but it's also fragile. It needs people like us to protect it, to listen to its whispers, and to act when the time comes." Lyra nodded, her heart calm, but her mind already buzzing with plans. The forest had given her its wisdom, and now it was time to use that wisdom to protect it. The journey ahead would not be easy, but Lyra knew that she was ready. The forest had chosen her, and she would do whatever it took to ensure that its whispers would continue to echo through the trees for generations to come. The warmth of the fire soothed Lyra as she sat in the older woman's cottage, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The air inside the small room was heavy with the scent of herbs and dried flowers, the soft crackling of the fire blending with the occasional creak of the wooden beams above. Despite the comfort, Lyra's mind was restless, turning over the vision the forest had shown her and the new responsibilities she now bore. Across from her, the older woman, Isolde, a name Lyra had only just learned, watched her with a calm, knowing gaze. Isolde's eyes, sharp yet kind, seemed to hold an understanding far beyond the confines of the small village, as though she had seen countless seasons of the forest whispers and changes. Her presence felt steady, grounding, as though she had become a part of the forest herself over the years. Era sipped her tea, letting the warmth fill her, and then glanced toward the window, where the night still lay thick and quiet outside. The village was sleeping, but the forest was always awake, always listening, always whispering. It had chosen her for a reason, but now, as the weight of that choice settled over her, she felt the enormity of it. Protecting the forest, ensuring that its whispers continued to echo through the trees, seemed like an impossible task for one person. Isolde set her cup down gently, the soft clink breaking the silence. "You've seen what's to come?" she said, her voice low and calm. "But you must understand, Era. The future the forest showed you isn't set in stone. The whispers guide us, yes, but they do not dictate every turn of the path. There is time to listen, time to act." Era met her gaze, uncertainty flickering in her chest. "But how do I know what to do? The forest has given me its wisdom, but it hasn't told me how to protect it. What if it's already too late?" Isolde smiled gently, the wrinkle around her eyes deepening with the expression. "The forest doesn't speak in direct answers, child. It shows you pieces, glimpses, because it trusts you to find your own way. The strength to protect the forest isn't something it can give you. It's something you already have within you." Era looked down at her cup, the steam rising in soft tendrils, and felt the weight of the moment settle over her. Isolde's words resonated with the whispers of the forest itself, soft, indirect, yet filled with truth. She had been given the gift of connection to the forest, but the responsibility that came with it was her own to carry. She took a deep breath, the cool night air slipping in through the cracks of the window, and let the tension in her shoulders ease. Isolde's presence was comforting, a reminder that she was not alone in this journey. The older woman had walked the path before her, had listened to the forest's whispers for years, and now she was here to help guide Era. "What do I need to do?" Era asked, her voice quieter now, more certain. "How do we begin?" Isolde leaned back in her chair, the firelight casting soft shadows over her face. "First, you must listen. Truly listen. The forest doesn't rush, and neither should you. Its wisdom comes slowly in its own time. There are others, too, who feel the call of the forest. People who, like you, have heard the whispers. We must find them. Others?" Era frowned slightly. "I thought it was just us." Isolde's eyes sparkled with a quiet amusement. "The forest is vast, child. It speaks to many, but not all can hear it. Some are too wrapped up in their own lives to notice. Others hear only fragments, pieces of the whispers that slip through the cracks of their thoughts. But there are a few, like you, who can truly hear, and they are out there, waiting for the call." Era's mind raced at the thought of others like herself, people who had been chosen by the forest, who carried the same connection to the trees, the earth, the whispers. The idea both excited and unnerved her. What would they be like? How would she find them? Isolde seemed to sense her unease, for she leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. You won't be alone in this, Era. The forest will guide you, as it always has. The path may not always be clear, but trust in the whispers. They will lead you to where you need to go. Era nodded slowly, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. The uncertainty was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelming. She didn't have all the answers, but she didn't need them. Not yet. The forest would reveal what she needed in time, just as it always had. They sat in silence for a while longer, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, the warmth of the tea still lingering in Era's hands. The weight of the future, of her role in protecting the forest, no longer felt as heavy. She wasn't alone in this. There were others out there, others who had heard the call, and together they would ensure that the whispers continued. The next morning, the sun rose over the village, casting a soft golden light over the rooftops and fields. Era stood outside Isolde's cottage, the cool morning air refreshing against her skin. The village was already stirring, the sounds of daily life echoing in the distance. Children laughing, the clatter of pots, the soft murmur of voices. But Era's thoughts were elsewhere. The whispers were faint in the morning light, but she could still feel them, a constant hum at the edge of her awareness. The forest was waiting for her, as it always was, but this time there was a sense of purpose behind the whispers, a quiet urgency that urged her forward. Isolde stood beside her, her face calm but her eyes sharp. You'll need to return to the forest soon, she said, her voice steady. The others are out there, Era. The forest will guide you to them. Era nodded, her heart steady, but her mind buzzing with anticipation. I'll find them. Isolde smiled softly. I know you will. With one last glance at the cottage, Era turned and made her way down the path that led back to the village. The forest's edge loomed in the distance, the trees standing tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The path ahead was uncertain, but Era felt a deep sense of peace. The forest had given her its wisdom, and now it was time for her to act. The village seemed to hum with life as Era walked through its streets. People greeted her with smiles and nods, their faces warm and familiar, but Era's thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't shake the sense of purpose that had settled over her, the knowledge that her journey was only just beginning. As she passed through the market square, the scent of fresh bread and herbs filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and conversation. Era paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the bustling scene. It all felt so distant now, so separate from the world of the forest. The village was her home, but the forest was her calling. She continued through the square, her feet carrying her toward the forest's edge. The whispers were growing louder now, soft but insistent, guiding her steps. She didn't know who she would find or where they would be, but she trusted the forest to show her the way. Lyra stepped beneath the canopy of trees, the familiar scent of pine and earth filling her senses. The forest welcomed her back with its soft whispers, its energy pulsing through the ground beneath her feet. She walked slowly, listening, waiting for the forest to guide her. The path ahead wound through familiar groves, past the great tree that had shared its wisdom with her. But today, the forest felt different. There was a quiet urgency in the air, a sense of movement, of something waiting just beyond the trees. The whispers were stronger now, clearer, as though the forest itself was guiding her towards something important. Lyra followed the path deeper into the woods, her footsteps light on the forest floor. The trees seemed to sway in time with the whispers, their branches casting long shadows across the ground. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. And then she saw it. Just ahead, at the edge of a small clearing, stood a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow. The figure was still, watching her with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Lyra's heart quickened, but she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a deep sense of recognition, as though she had been expecting this moment all along. The whispers grew louder, urging her forward, and Lyra stepped into the clearing. The figure remained still, its gaze fixed on her. But there was no malice in its stance, only quiet observation, as though it too was waiting for something. Lyra stopped a few paces from the figure, her breath steady, her heart calm. "Are you here for the forest?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. The figure tilted its head slightly, and then, with a soft rustle of fabric, the hood of the cloak fell away, revealing the face of a young man. His eyes, bright and clear, met hers with a quiet intensity. "I've heard the whispers," he said simply, his voice low and even. Lyra nodded slowly, her heart steady but her mind racing. The forest had led her here, to this moment, to this person, and now, as the two of them stood together in the quiet clearing, she knew that the forest's call was growing louder. "You're not the only one," she said softly. "There are others." The young man's eyes flickered with understanding. "I know." Lyra glanced back at the trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, the whispers filling the air around them. The journey was far from over, but now, with an ally by her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they would ensure that the forest's whispers continued. Lyra stood in the clearing, her gaze fixed on the young man standing before her. His eyes were calm, clear, and filled with a quiet intensity that mirrored her own. The forest had led her to him. Just as it had whispered that there were others, others who could hear its voice, who carried the same connection to the trees, the earth, and the ancient wisdom that ran through the roots of the world. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds filling the silence between them. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, the whispers quieter now, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Era's heart beat steadily in her chest, her mind buzzing with questions. Who was this man? How long had he been hearing the whispers? And why had the forest chosen him, just as it had chosen her? The young man broke the silence first, his voice low and calm. "I've been waiting for this." Era raised an eyebrow, surprised by the certainty in his tone. "You've been waiting?" He nodded, stepping forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I didn't know when or how, but I felt the forest calling me for years. It started as a whisper, a soft hum in the back of my mind. But lately, it's been louder, clearer. I knew it was leading me here." Era felt a shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of recognition. His story mirrored her own in so many ways. The whispers had always been there, growing louder over time, pulling her deeper into the heart of the forest. And now, standing before the stranger, she understood that their paths had always been meant to cross. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softer now, more measured. "Darian," he replied, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "And you?" "Era." Darian nodded, as though her name carried some unspoken weight. "The forest chose you, too." Era didn't need to confirm it. He already knew. She could see it in his eyes, the same understanding she had felt when she first realized the forest had given her its wisdom, entrusted her with its secrets. The same knowledge that weighed on her now, the knowledge that the forest was fading and that they were part of the effort to protect it. For a moment, Era studied Darian, taking in the quiet confidence in his posture, the calm yet intense focus in his eyes. There was something about him, something that made her trust him, even though they had only just met. Perhaps it was the shared bond of the forest, the knowledge that they were both connected to something larger, something ancient and powerful. "I don't know why the forest chose us," Era said quietly, her gaze drifting to the trees around them, "but I know that we have a responsibility to protect it." "It's fading, Darian." The whispers are growing quieter. "The vision it showed me." She trailed off, the memory of the vision still heavy in her mind. Darian's expression grew more serious, and he stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "I felt it too. The forest is weakening. The forest is weakening. The trees are older, their roots not as deep. It's as though the very essence of the forest is slipping away." Era nodded, her heart heavy with the truth of his words. "We have to do something, but I don't know what. The forest hasn't shown me everything yet. It's given me its wisdom, but it hasn't told me how to stop what's happening." Darian was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. The forest doesn't reveal everything at once. It gives us what we need, when we need it. But I think it's leading us somewhere. "Where?" I don't know yet, he admitted, but I feel it. There's something deeper, something at the heart of the forest that we need to find. I think that's where the answers are. Era felt a flicker of hope in her chest. It made sense. If the forest had given them its wisdom, then it must also have a way to guide them to what they needed. But how? And what would they find when they reached the heart of the forest? The air around them grew cooler as the wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. The whispers, once faint and distant, seemed to grow louder, swirling around them like a soft breeze. Era closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her, feeling the pull of the forest deep in her bones. When she opened her eyes again, Darian was watching her closely, his expression thoughtful. "We can't wait," he said quietly. "The longer we wait, the weaker the forest becomes. We need to go deeper, find the source of the whispers." Erin nodded, her heart steady, but her mind filled with anticipation. The forest had brought them together for a reason, and now it was time to act. "Let's go," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. The path ahead was dark and winding, the trees growing closer together, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead that blocked out most of the light. The air was cooler here, the ground soft and covered in a thick layer of moss. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to come alive around them, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Darian walked beside her, his steps quiet and measured, his gaze focused on the path ahead. Era could sense the same tension in him that she felt within herself, the knowledge that they were walking towards something unknown, something important, but also dangerous. "What do you think we'll find?" Era asked after a long silence, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Darian didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, as though he were still piecing together his thoughts. "I don't know, but I don't think it will be what we expect." Era glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" He shrugged slightly, his gaze still fixed on the path ahead. The forest has always been full of mysteries. It doesn't reveal itself all at once. I think what we find at the heart of the forest will be different than what we've imagined. It won't just be a place. It won't just be a place. It will be a truth, something we need to understand before we can act. Era nodded slowly, considering his words. The forest had always spoken in whispers, in riddles and mysteries, revealing its wisdom piece by piece. Whatever they found at the heart of the forest, it wouldn't be a simple answer. It would be something deeper, something that would require them to look within themselves as well as at the world around them. They walked in silence for a while longer, the forest growing darker and more dense with each step. The whispers swirled around them, faint but constant, guiding their path. Era felt the weight of the journey ahead pressing down on her, but she also felt a quiet determination rising within her. She didn't know what they would find, but she knew they were on the right path. As they walked, the trees began to thin slightly, and the ground beneath their feet grew firmer. The air here was different, cooler, but also more still, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Era could feel the shift in the energy around her, the whispers growing quieter, more focused, as though they were being drawn towards something just ahead. They stepped into a small clearing, the trees around them towering high into the sky, their branches heavy with silver leaves that shimmered in the dim light. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone altar, its surface worn smooth by time, its edges covered in moss and ivy. Era's breath caught in her throat as she approached the altar, her heart beating steadily in her chest. The whispers were louder here, filling the air with their soft hum, and she could feel the energy of the place pulsing beneath her feet. "This is it," Darian said quietly, his voice barely louder than the whispers themselves. "The heart of the forest." Era nodded, her eyes fixed on the altar. It radiated a sense of ancient power, of wisdom that had been buried deep within the forest for centuries. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, the knowledge that whatever they were about to uncover would change everything. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Darian stepped forward, his hand brushing the surface of the altar. "We listen," he said simply. "The forest will show us what we need to do." The air in the clearing grew thick with silence, the whispers fading into a soft hum that filled the space around them. Era closed her eyes, her heart steady but her mind racing. She could feel the energy of the altar, the deep, ancient power that pulsed through the ground beneath her feet. The forest had led them here, to this place, and now it was time for the truth to be revealed. For a long moment, nothing happened. The clearing remained still, the whispers quiet as though the forest was waiting for something, some sign, some moment of clarity. And then slowly, the ground beneath the altar began to tremble, a faint vibration that grew stronger with each passing second. Era's eyes snapped open, her breath catching in her throat as she watched the moss and ivy that covered the altar begin to shift, pulling away to reveal the smooth stone beneath. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the air with a soft hum that seemed to pulse in time with the trembling earth. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the trembling stopped. The clearing was silent again, the air still, the whispers fading into the background. But something had changed. Era could feel it, deep within her bones, in the very core of her being. The forest had shown them the way, and now it was up to them to understand the truth that lay before them. Era stood frozen before the ancient altar, her breath shallow as the final tremors of the earth faded beneath her feet. The air was thick with silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of something waiting, watching. The whispers that had accompanied her all the way through the forest had stilled, leaving only the faintest hum, like the last echo of a distant voice. Beside her, Darian was equally still, his eyes locked on the smooth stone surface of the altar, The moss and ivy that had once clung to it had peeled back, revealing symbols carved deep into the rock. These symbols seemed to pulse faintly, glowing with an inner light, as though they held a secret yet to be revealed. "This place," Darian murmured, his voice hushed in the thick air. "It's ancient, older than the village, older than the forest itself." Era nodded, her mind racing to comprehend what they were standing before. The forest had guided them here, step by step, whisper by whisper. This altar, this heart of the forest, held the answers they sought, but it wasn't offering them freely. They had to understand, to listen, to open themselves to the truth hidden in the ancient stone. "The forest led us here for a reason," Era said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But what are we supposed to do?" Darian moved closer to the altar, his fingertips brushing the surface of the stone. The glow from the symbols seemed to intensify at his touch, illuminating the intricate patterns that snaked across the altar's surface like veins. He stood silently for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's not just about seeing the symbols," he said slowly. "It's about feeling them. The forest isn't going to tell us what to do. We have to figure it out ourselves." Era frowned, stepping closer to him, her own hand reaching out to touch the cool stone. The moment her fingers made contact, a rush of warmth flowed through her, filling her from the tips of her fingers down to her toes. It wasn't just warmth, though. It was energy, pulsing and alive, coursing through the stone and into her. The symbols seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, growing brighter, more vivid. And then, slowly, they began to shift. The symbols moved like liquid, reforming themselves into new patterns that flowed across the surface of the altar. Era could hardly believe what she was seeing, but she felt the truth of it in her bones. This was the forest's way of speaking to them. The whispers had quieted, but the forest was still guiding them, showing them the path forward through these ancient, shifting symbols. "What's happening?" she whispered, her fingers still pressed against the stone. Darian's gaze was intense, his eyes following the movement of the symbols as they rearranged themselves. "The forest is revealing something to us, but I don't think it's just about the symbols. We need to interpret them." Era felt a knot form in her chest, a surge of anxiety. How could they possibly interpret symbols that were older than the forest itself? Symbols that seemed to defy all understanding. But then she felt it. The same quiet certainty she had felt when she first stepped into the forest. When the whispers had first called to her, this wasn't about logic or knowledge. This was about trust. Trusting the forest, trusting herself, trusting the connection that bound her to this ancient place. "The forest chose us for a reason," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet strength that came from deep within. "We have to trust it." Darian glanced at her, his expression softening. "You're right. It's not about knowing everything. It's about listening." Together, they stood in silence, their hands resting on the altar as the symbols continued to shift and flow beneath their touch. The light from the symbols bathed them in a soft glow, and the air around them seemed to hum with energy, as though the forest itself was breathing with them. The symbols slowed their movement, gradually settling into a new pattern, one that Era instinctively knew was significant. It was simple yet profound. A circle surrounded by 4 distinct shapes, each pointing outward in a different direction. Darian was the first to speak. The 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. Era nodded, and the circle at the center: balance, the heart of the forest. "It's telling us about balance," Darian said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "The forest is in danger because the balance has been disrupted. The trees, the whispers, they're all part of that balance, and something has tipped it out of harmony." Era felt a chill run down her spine. The forest had shown her the future, the trees growing older, weaker, the whispers fading. It was all part of the same imbalance, a shift that had been happening slowly over time, but was now accelerating. And if they didn't act, the forest would die. "The forest is calling us to restore the balance," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the responsibility that now rested on their shoulders. "But how do we do that?" Darian stepped back from the altar, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know, but the answer has to be here, somewhere in the forest at its core. We need to go deeper, find the source of the imbalance." Era nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what they would find or what dangers lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. The forest was depending on them. They had been chosen for this task, and now they had to see it through. The path ahead was uncertain, but Era felt a renewed sense of purpose as they left the clearing and ventured deeper into the forest. The whispers had returned, soft but steady, guiding their steps. The air was cool and crisp, the scent of pine and earth filling their lungs as they moved through the dense trees. Darian walked beside her, his gaze focused on the path ahead. Though they didn't speak, Era felt a quiet understanding between them, a shared determination to see this through. They had been chosen by the forest, and now they had a duty to protect it, to restore the balance that had been lost. The forest grew darker as they traveled deeper, the trees towering overhead, their branches thick with leaves that blocked out much of the light. The ground beneath their feet was soft and covered in a thick layer of moss, and the air was filled with the faint sound of rustling leaves and the occasional creak of a distant tree trunk. As they walked, Era's mind raced with questions. What had caused the imbalance in the first place? Was it something natural? A slow shift over time? Or was it something more sinister, something or someone that had disturbed the harmony of the forest? "We're close," Darian said suddenly, breaking the silence. His eyes were sharp, his gaze focused on the trees ahead. "Can you feel it?" Era nodded. She could feel it, the faint hum of energy that pulsed through the ground beneath her feet, the way the air seemed to vibrate with tension. They were close to something powerful, something that held the key to the balance they needed to restore. They pushed forward, the path narrowing as the trees grew closer together. The air grew cooler and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Era could feel the tension building, a sense of urgency that made her heart race. And then, just ahead, they saw it, a massive stone structure hidden deep within the forest. It was ancient, its surface covered in moss and vines, its edges worn smooth by time. It towered above them, a monument to something long forgotten. Darian slowed his pace, his eyes wide with awe. What is this place? Era's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer to the structure. The whispers were loud now, filling her mind with 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 possibilities. This place. It was at the heart of the forest, the source of the imbalance. This is where it began, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the whispers. This is where we'll find the answer. The structure loomed over them, its surface cold and unyielding, as Era reached out to touch it. The stone hummed beneath her fingers, a low vibration that resonated deep within her. This place, it held the answers they had been seeking, but it also held something more, something ancient, something dangerous. We need to be careful, Darian said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and caution. Whatever caused the imbalance, it's connected to this place. Era nodded, her hand still resting on the stone. The forest brought us here for a reason. We need to understand what happened before we can restore the balance. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her fingers tracing the symbols carved into the stone surface. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and Era could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. This place was powerful, but it was also broken, fragmented. The balance had been lost here, and it was up to them to fix it. We'll find the answer, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. We have to. Darian stepped beside her, his gaze fixed on the structure. We will. Era stood before the ancient stone structure, her fingers tracing the cold, smooth surface as the whispers of the forest filled her mind. The air around her was heavy with anticipation, the energy of the place vibrating beneath her skin. This was it, the heart of the forest, the place where everything had begun. And now it was up to her and Darian to understand what had gone wrong, to find the answers that would restore the balance. Beside her, Darian's expression was tense, his gaze locked on the towering structure. He could feel it too, the power, the danger, the sense that something was waiting just beneath the surface. He had felt the pull of the forest for years, but now, standing here, he realized that this was only the beginning. The real test was yet to come. The whispers, Era murmured, her voice soft but urgent. They're louder here, more chaotic. Darian nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is where the imbalance started. Whatever happened here, it's what's been causing the forest to weaken. Era's hand pressed more firmly against the stone, feeling the low hum of energy that pulsed through it. The symbols carved into the surface seemed to shift beneath her touch, as though they were alive, responding to the presence of her and Darian. The whispers grew more frantic, swirling around her like a storm, but there was something beneath the chaos. Something deeper, more ancient, trying to make itself known. We need to understand what this place is, Era said, stepping back to look at the full height of the structure. It's ancient, older than the village, older than the forest itself. But it's been forgotten, buried. Why? Darian took a deep breath, his gaze following the intricate carvings that snaked their way up the stone. Maybe it was meant to be forgotten, whatever caused the imbalance. It's tied to this place. But if it's powerful enough to disrupt the forest, why wasn't it destroyed? Era frowned, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it couldn't be destroyed. Maybe it had to be contained. Darian stepped forward, his fingers brushing the carvings that spiraled across the surface of the stone. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft light that seemed to grow stronger the longer he touched them. There was something familiar about the energy that flowed through the structure, something that resonated with the whispers of the forest. This isn't just a monument, Darian said slowly. It's a seal. Era's eyes widened. A seal? Darian nodded, his voice filled with certainty. This place, this structure, it was built to contain something powerful. The imbalance in the forest, it's because this seal is weakening. Whatever's inside is starting to break free. Era's heart raced as the weight of Darian's words settled over her. The forest had shown her the vision of the future, the trees growing weaker, the whispers fading, the balance slipping away. And now, she understood why. This place, this seal, was holding back a force that had the power to unravel the very fabric of the forest itself. And now it was failing. We need to stop it, Era said, her voice filled with urgency. We need to strengthen the seal, or everything will be lost. Darian stepped back from the stone, his eyes filled with determination. But how? The forest has given us its wisdom, but it hasn't told us how to fix this. Era took a deep breath, her mind racing. The forest had guided them here, to this moment, but now it was up to them to act. The whispers were still there, chaotic and urgent, but beneath the chaos, she could feel something else, a deeper current of knowledge, a quiet truth that had been buried beneath the noise. "We need to listen," she said softly, closing her eyes, "not to the chaos, but to the chaos, but to the truth beneath it. The forest is still guiding us." Era stood still, her eyes closed, her breath steady as she focused on the whispers. They were frantic, swirling around her like a storm, but she didn't let herself get swept up in the chaos. Instead, she reached deeper, beneath the surface noise, searching for the calm, steady pulse of the forest's wisdom. And then slowly, she felt it. A quiet hum, a soft vibration that pulsed through the ground beneath her feet. It was the same energy she had felt when she first touched the ancient tree, the same warmth that had flowed through her when she placed her hand on the altar. It was the forest itself, alive and ancient, speaking to her in a way that words could never capture. Darian stood beside her, his eyes closed as well, his hand resting on the stone. He too was listening to the whispers, to the energy that flowed through the ground, to the quiet wisdom of the forest. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the world around them fading away as they connected with the ancient power of the forest. And then, slowly, the whispers began to change. The chaos faded, replaced by a soft, steady rhythm, a heartbeat pulsing through the earth. Era's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding in time with the rhythm she felt beneath her feet. "The balance," she whispered. "It's the balance." Darian opened his eyes as well, his gaze sharp with understanding. The forest's balance, it's tied to this place. The seal, it's not just holding something back, it's part of the balance itself. Era nodded, her mind racing as the pieces began to fall into place. The forest is weakening because the seal is weakening. If the seal breaks, the balance will be destroyed. "We need to restore the balance," Darian said, his voice steady but urgent. "But how?" Era's gaze drifted back to the symbols on the stone, glowing faintly beneath the surface. The forest had shown them the way here, had given them its wisdom, but now it was up to them to act. The answer was here, in this place, in the symbols that snaked across the stone-like veins of light. "The symbols," Era said, stepping closer to the stone. "They're the key. The forest has been guiding us to this moment, to understand how to restore the balance." Darian frowned, his gaze following the intricate patterns etched into the stone. "But how do we use them?" Era took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the glowing symbols. "We have to trust the forest. We have to trust that it's given us everything we need." With a steady hand, Era began to trace the symbols with her fingers, feeling the warmth of the stone beneath her touch. The symbols glowed brighter as she moved, their light pulsing in time with the rhythm of the earth beneath her feet. Darian watched her closely, his expression tense but filled with determination. As Era traced the final symbol, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the stone and into the ground beneath them. The whispers grew louder, But this time, they weren't chaotic. They were clear, focused, guiding her every move. "The balance is shifting," Darian said quietly, his eyes wide with awe. "It's working." Era felt the energy of the forest flowing through her, stronger than ever before. The ground beneath her feet pulsed with life, with the ancient power of the trees, the earth, the air. The seal wasn't just a barrier. It was a connection, a link between the forest and the energy that sustained it. "We're restoring the balance," Era said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "The forest is healing." But even as she spoke, she could feel something else, a resistance, a shadow that lingered just beyond the edge of her awareness. The seal was being restored, but whatever had caused the imbalance in the first place wasn't gone. It was still there, waiting, watching, hidden in the darkness. Darian stepped beside her, his hand resting on the stone. "The forest has given us its wisdom," he said softly. "But we still have to face whatever caused this." Era nodded, her heart steady, but her mind filled with the weight of what lay ahead. The forest had chosen them to restore the balance, but now it was clear that their journey wasn't over. They had healed the seal, but they hadn't destroyed the force that had caused the imbalance. "The real challenge is still ahead," Era said quietly, her eyes locked on the ancient structure. "We have to face whatever's inside." Darian's gaze was steady, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "And we will. Together." The air around them was still, the forest silent as Era and Darian stood before the ancient structure. The seal had been restored, the balance of the forest slowly returning, but the danger was far from over. Deep within the stone, beneath the layers of moss and ivy, something dark and powerful still lingered. Something that had been waiting for centuries to break free. Era took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The forest had brought them here, had given them its wisdom and its strength, but now it was up to them to face the darkness that had caused the imbalance in the first place. She glanced at Darian, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "Are you ready?" He nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm with you." Together, they stepped forward, their hands resting on the cold stone of the ancient structure. The whispers had quieted now, replaced by a deep, steady hum. The heartbeat of the forest, strong and constant. They could feel the power of the seal beneath their fingers, the ancient energy that flowed through the earth and into the trees. But they could also feel the darkness, the shadow that lurked just beyond the edges of the light. It was waiting for them, hidden deep within the stone, and they knew that they would have to face it before the balance could truly be restored. With one last breath, Era and Darian pressed their hands against the stone, and the darkness stirred.